From the retrial of Michael Slager to the sentencing phase of the convicted Emanuel AME shooter, Reverend Joe Darby talks to me one-on-one for a special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. Reverend Darby,
My friend.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, as we sit here right now, there's so much going on right now.
Oh yeah, man. Plenty of stuff.
Describe to me the following one word. The convicted Emanuel AME shooter competent to stand trial in the sentencing phase.
Yes. I guess that's the one word.
The convicted Emanuel AME shooter defending himself in the sentencing phase.
Not a good idea.
Mm.
You know, there's an old saying that when you represent yourself, you have a fool for a lawyer. And I think that's going to be the case in this case. But he has the right to exercise that right. I would certainly not deny it.
The retrial of Michael Slager.
I hope it goes better than the first trial of Michael Slager. I hope they get a jury that is able to look and to make a clear decision without waffling. I hope that the jurors that they question from the pool are honest about what they would do once they get on the jury. And I hope that there's more than one black face on the jury.
Speaking of which, Dorsey Montgomery, the jury foreman, in the first trial, described to me him in one word.
Can't.
The federal trial of Michael Slager.
Hopefully it will go well as well. I have really more hope for the federal than the state trial because federal court tends to be more just sometimes in cases like this, especially since this is more of a civil rights violation case on the federal level.
Right. Let me turn back to the convicted Emanuel AME shooter. Obviously, your former church, Morris Brown AME Church, was on that list. And I know that Reverend Quintin talked to Channel 2, I guess last week about it. He basically said this, quote, "I was not surprised because of the thing he was looking for in identifying churches. But I was disappointed because you never want to see a church that you serve and people you love on a list like that." What was that one thing in his mind?
The killer?
Yeah.
I think he had a hot list of churches he wanted to visit to start a race war. I guess if he didn't meet with his success at one, he would have moved on to the other. And I would stand basically where Reverend Keaton stood. My son and I talked the week after the tragedy.
Right.
And my oldest son, he reminded me, he said, you were a very big mouth pastor at Morris Brown. And had you still been pastor instead of presiding elder, that might have been you. And he's true.
Obviously, he shared the news with his particular parishioners, and obviously that news didn't take long to spread.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And I know you still keep in contact with most of those people. Can you share with me their reaction to that particular horrible news?
They were not surprised either. I mean, they took it amazingly in stride. I think there's an understanding at Morris Brown of the role of the black church, particularly the role in advocacy. And I think there's an understanding with that role, there comes some risks. That's a part of the game. When we did not have nearly as much in the way of security as the church has now. All of the churches ramped up the security after Emanuel, but when we would do something large like watch night, we would have the police sweep the grounds beforehand just to make sure everything looked okay.
Obviously, you were a pastor there back in the day.
Yeah, 14 years.
And obviously, Morris Brown AME has a long, rich history in Charleston. For those people who don't know, what is the history of Morris Brown AME Church?
Oh, it's interesting history. The basic story of the AME Church coming to South Carolina was the founding of that first congregation, the antebellum congregation, that had to go underground because of the Denmark Vesey incident. When they went underground and Vesey and his conspirators were executed, the pastor of that church, who was named Morris Brown, left, went to Philadelphia, became the second bishop of the church. Never came back to South Carolina, but in 1865, when the church was reestablished, Bishop Daniel Payne went to Hilton Head first, in my present district, established Queen Chapel. He then came back to Charleston and revived that underground congregation, and it grew so rapidly that two other churches immediately sprang into being. The first of those, Mount Zion on Glebe Street, second of those, Morris Brown.
Yeah.
So it's tied to that history.
And another a person who's part of that history now is Reverend James Quintin Jr.
Yes.
When you think of him, what sticks out to you?
I have chatted with him a couple of times. He has a servant's heart. I think that's a good thing because a good pastor has to be pastor as well as prophet, priest as well as prophet. And so I think he has the capacity to do that. I think he also has an interest in social justice. I know that when he was in the area of Pennsylvania, chaired the NACP's Religious Affairs Committee. So I think that he will do well at Morris Brown, that he will see that the pastoral work is done and that the church speaks to the community as a church like Morris Brown rightfully should.
As we sit right now, it's January 3rd, 2017.
Yeah.
What do you expect to happen in 2017? Obviously, Governor Nikki Haley is on her way to become the U.S. ambassador to the UN.
Yeah.
Henry McMaster will be taking over as governor, most likely.
Yeah.
What else is in your mind that will stick out for you as far as 2017?
I haven't the foggiest idea. We're entering the age of Trump. We'll see how long that age lasts. We'll see if he makes it without getting impeached. I'm curious to see what the rhetoric will look like in 2017 because for the last 8 years, a bunch of ignorant folk have beat up Barack Obama, blamed everything on him, denigrated Hillary Clinton. Now that they have basically full control of the presidency, both houses of Congress, arguably, because he'll be making appointments to the Supreme Court, they can't blame anything on the Democrats anymore. It's their watch. And so whatever goes right or wrong, they'll have to own up to it. And I would hope that people of conscience would stand up and be heard. There's a need, I think, for people of conscience, especially with what we have nationally in the next 4 years, to not sit back and be silent and say that's the way it is. We have to speak truth to power. I think the church is an instrument that still has to play that role.
Mm-hmm. Reverend Joe Darby, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this.
Thank you, Quintin.
Thank you.
My brother.
I appreciate that.
God bless.
Likewise.